Pizza time.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
I believe there's a hero in all of us. Gives us strength, makes us noble. Even though sometimes we have to give up the thing we want the most.
Parker!
Where you been? Looking for you all morning.
You're late.
Always late!
You're fired.
Look at you, Peter. Your grades have been declining. You always appear exhausted.
I know, I'm trying.
So where you been, pal? You don't return my calls.
I've been kind of busy.
Taking pictures of your friend. Spider-Man killed my father.
No matter what I do,
Do you love me or not?
no matter how hard I try,
I want Spider-Man dead.
it's the ones I love who will always be the ones who pay.
I can't keep thinking about you. I'm getting married.
I want a life of my own. I'm Spider-Man. No more.
You look different.
I let things get in the way before. There was something I thought I had to do. I don't have to.
I liked seeing you tonight, Peter.
Now on to the main event.
Octavius is gonna put Oscorp on the map in a way my father never even dreamed of.
Crazy scientist turns himself into some kind of a monster. 4 mechanical arms welded right onto his body.
You take Spider-Man's pictures. Where is he?
Sick of me off your loyalty to Spider-Man and not your best friend. Bring Spider-Man to me.
How do I find him?
Peter Parker.
Find Spider-Man, or I'll peel the flesh off her bones.
There are bigger things happening here than me and you.
Let's see who's behind the mask.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me is Mr. Dan Merritt of Green Brain Comics.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
On this special live podcast, we are discussing the movie we just saw, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Released a mere 2 years after Raimi's previous film, the film stars Tobey Maguire as the alter ego of the titular Spider-Man. He's having a rough time balancing his great power with his great responsibility, having trouble paying his bills, delivering pizza time, and not disappointing his friends and family. I would say that we're going to ruin this film as we discuss it, but you just saw it. So, Dan, what is your experience with Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2?
Spider-Man is probably one of my first superhero comic experiences. I remember particularly as a child on a long road trip, my mom bought me a bunch of small Marvel digests. They're smaller, just your standard paperback. And these reprinted the earliest Spider-Man by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And I remember being in the back seat of this Woody station wagon, just devouring these comics. And my mom just looking peacefully back at me, and my dad, I just know he's just steaming like, boy, you should be looking out the window and enjoying nature. Like, Dad, Spider-Man. Spider-Man's been with me for pretty much my whole life. Wow. And, this particular movie I was real jazzed about because Doc Ock, he was in that first volume of the Spider-Man Digest, and I was really excited to see him live. And did not disappoint, man. This is just an amazing movie.
Yeah, I think he's been around since the third issue of Spider-Man, I want to say, because I was reading some of those collected volumes, and I want to say it was number 3, so very quick off the bat we're getting Doc Ock introduced, which makes a lot of sense. The 8-legged foe versus the hero that could have 8 legs, eventually he does, in different incarnations, but especially we'll see as we go through this series of films where he gets the extra arms from Iron Man, of all people. But yeah, it was very smart to have the octopus versus the spider, the arachnid versus the cephalopod.
And it started a trend with Spider-Man villains of being animal-based. You got the lizard, you got the vulture. It also started a trend of body types that weren't your traditional supervillain.
True.
Doc Ock was a little bit heavier set. Vulture, a little bit older, a little bit decrepit. Spider-Man, he had the most interesting foes, and Doc Ock was one of the best.
For me, Spider-Man has always been that great hero who's balancing real life with his superpower. And that was the thing. He's just the most relatable superhero for me, that he is having all these money problems. He's getting fired from his jobs. He sucks at school right now. It made it so relatable. My entree into Spider-Man was probably through the old Marvel cartoons, and then also even it was on NBC, the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I think I was watching that before I started to read Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's one of those titles where you've got what? Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man. One of those was a reprint series. I can't remember which. Not Spectacular or Amazing. Maybe it was Web. But there were just all of these titles, and it was so interesting the way they would bounce from title to title and the way that you could follow the story throughout all of that. And I got out of comics maybe in the mid-'80s, the 86, 87, and then in the early 90s I said, I'm going to pick up one title, and I'm just going to follow Spider-Man. Every Spider-Man title that there is, I'm going to follow that, which got to be really expensive, really fast. And that was also, unfortunately, during the Jackal era, the whole clones of Peter Parker stuff, which was just absolute dog shit. If you like the clones of Peter Parker, that's great, but I hated Ben Parker. I think that helped spin off the Spider-Verse and all those. Oh, different Spider-Mans for different times. Okay, great. That's cool. But eventually I had to give it up again. But revisiting the movies was just such a pleasure. And I love Alfred Molina. Is just fantastic. What a great actor. What a great villain. And to your point, kind of buff, but also dumpy at the same time.
Yeah, he definitely had a bigger belt size. The movie, to me, is rewatching it over and over, it really typifies that Peter Parker character for me. They really took the template from the comic, and they made him the biggest loser.
Yes.
You know, just seeing him dropping his books and just getting whacked in the head by all the passerbys on the campus. Man, he just gets beat down. And I think Sam Raimi really liked that about the character.
I think he really likes beating up Tobey Maguire as well.
Yeah, I think we saw that this film, yeah.
Yeah, he apparently whenever there was debris flying, it was Sam Raimi who was the one throwing the debris. So I was noticing when there was leaves coming out his face when he was at the gravesite, I was like, I wonder if that's Sam there throwing those leaves. Hitting him in the face.
He's getting every dollar's worth.
Oh, man. And the direction for these. So the first Spider-Man, I think a lot of people didn't know who Sam Raimi was when that first Spider-Man came out. It really hit the mainstream. But for me, it was so interesting to see that first Spider-Man film and to know Darkman and to see how Darkman really set that template. When you go back and you watch Darkman, you see those quick zoom-ins and all that. I mean, we've seen that from Raimi from his entire career, but it really feels like the template for what we saw in the Spider-Man films.
Yeah, I think it really served the story here, being less gimmicky. I felt like he used it as a tool in his toolbox versus the new toy. And I was very impressed with rewatching it, how much of an impact those quick zooms really made in this movie.
Yeah, the scene of Doc Ock when the limbs come alive and start to murder all the doctors and nurses, one of the best sequences for me. And I especially love all those little details, all the quick cuts. It looks so good but the things like the reflection in the mask or the reflection on the chainsaw or that woman who's grabbing on for dear life and being dragged across and like it's supposed to be her fingernails digging into the linoleum. She's just so desperate to stay alive. Just so good.
Yeah, hearing about how they did some of those effects in that particular scene made it a little bit less horrifying for me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's terrifying.
Yes.
It was a little mini horror vignette movie right in the middle of this action film.
Yeah. And it just was so typical of his style. And I know Bob Murawski cut this, and Murawski's been his editor for so many years. And just those things, I think by that time they had their own kind of shorthand. And I want to say that sequence was one of the first ones that they delivered, the whole hospital sequence. And because it's almost like, to your point, a mini movie inside of the movie.
The thing that I find most amazing about this entire movie is that they didn't have a story. Putting this together, they knew that they had scenes that they wanted to hit, but they didn't have a story.
The story of the making of Spider-Man that should be a documentary unto itself. And just to, especially because I'm sure everybody here knows that there was so much legal rigmarole around it because you had those movies being made back in the mid-'80s, things like the Fantastic Four, the Roger Corman version. You had all of these films, the Albert Pune Captain America film, and there was supposed to be a Spider-Man movie that James Cameron wrote the scriptment for. It wasn't a script, it wasn't a treatment, it was a scriptment. Yeah, whatever. And the big thing that came out of that, which rocked a lot of people's worlds, and this just sounds ridiculous to me now, is that people were fighting and screaming and carrying on about Spider-Man's web shooters and that they were organic. His webs were organic to his body. It's, why not? You can do all of these other things, but the web shooters are the sticking point that he has to make the web shooters. Why not just have them come out of his wrists and you don't ever have to worry about running out of web fluid. You just have to worry about when you start to doubt your own powers and start to feel more of that worldly pressure, then maybe the webs won't work.
I have to admit to about 5 minutes of righteous fanboy rage when I heard that. Like, what? No, he invented those shooters. He's a mechanical genius. But he wasn't. He was a chemistry student.
Making the web formula was one thing, but to come up with the actual shooters that have that distance and then could do all those things, like we saw web balls for the first time in this one, which was nice. Yeah. So now he's got ballistic weapons, basically. I was reading the first Spider-Man, not the James Cameron one, but when David Koepp was writing Amazing Spider-Man, and they even had based on a script meant by James Cameron. Like they had to keep that in there. And then started to read the script for what this one was, and that was wild to read what he wanted to do. So David Koepp was one of the primary writers, but I believe that by this time that I was reading it, it was an Alvin Sargent script, but the premise was so much around Spider-Man's parents. And it was, which they end up doing in the Mark Webb ones, which not a big fan of the Mark Webb ones. I would still recommend coming out and buying tickets for the Mark Webb films.
Come on out next week. Next Monday, 7 o'clock.
2 weeks from now. Next week, Spider-Man 3. We'll definitely talk about Spider-Man 3 a little bit too. But it was two scientists who were Peter's mom and dad, and then the third scientist. And then, wouldn't you know, the third scientist is Dr. Octopus. So there's this whole thing of, oh, I knew your parents and I love them so much and I want to continue their work. And there's this doohickey, this special crystal that he needs in order to create this thing. Basically, Spider-Man gives it to him and he's just like, what a fool. And I'm like, oh boy. But it was neat to read it. And some of the jokes that were in that script from 2 years or more before this came out were still in there. So the whole thing of the headline about the food poisoning and then
some food got poisoned?
I'm a little nauseous, yeah.
Wow, yeah, what a throwaway line to keep.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But it's so great seeing Ted Raimi, and it's so great seeing so many of Sam Raimi's stock characters in here, stock players.
It was great seeing Ted Raimi in here. He's so funny. Yes. And this movie is ridiculously funny. I have to assume intentionally, but boy, there's times like when I think that laugh maybe wasn't written into the script. Aside from all the Tobey Maguire strained faces, there's lots of comedy pacing in this movie. I loved it.
I watched this movie a few times over the weekend, as I know you did as well. And I didn't laugh at the Harry Osborn stuff, but this audience sure did love that.
Oh, yeah, they loved it.
And it's true, he is over the top.
Oh, yeah. Just cold, just immediately going cold on Peter Parker.
Wow. What about your friend, Spider-Man? He's got a bone pick with Spider-Man, as you should expect.
Absolutely. Mortal enemies.
Yes. But yeah, so I was saying to Dan before we started to record that I saw Dan Hicks, who was also in Evil Dead 2. The guy who brings in the Spider-Man suit was in A Simple Plan, and I want to say he was in a few more Raimi films, but I'm not sure. And then even, well, he wasn't in one of Raimi's films, but what is the name of the butler? Bernard, yes, thank you. Bernard. He is Bill Paxton's father. Bill Paxton, who was in A Simple Plan, there's his dad, so plays a great role.
And there's a long list of just walk-on characters in this entire movie. Like comedians Joey Diaz, Donnell Washington,
Joe McHale, Hal Sparks. Apparently and you might have just said this gentleman's name, the guy who says, he stole Spider-Man's pizzas. That was supposed to be Stan Lee's line. But then they gave up to this other guy, and then I don't know if you folks saw that Stan Lee's just there helping out when Doc Ock is pulling down some stones, and he's got Aunt May with him and everything.
Yeah, was that like his only non-speaking walk-on part?
I think it might be, yeah, because he almost always has a funny line or a little quip about stuff.
He was busy that week.
I can't believe that they gave his line to somebody else, but yeah, I don't remember what his line is in Spider-Man 3, but yeah. Hopefully he got a line again.
We'll find out.
We'll find out next week. You'll find out. I don't know if I can take Spider-Man 3 one more time. That was so painful to see in the theaters the first time.
The great thing about running a comic book store is I have about 1,000 movie critics that not only help me locate great movies, but avoid certain movies. Mm-hmm. And I've been warned from a few movies.
Yeah.
But I'm curious.
All right. Enjoy yourself with that. I'll tell you one thing that doesn't pay off is they've been leading this whole time to Dylan Baker. He plays Dr. Connors. And we see him in the first movie, he's got 2 arms. We see him in this movie, he's got 1 arm. So he's on that path to becoming Lizard, but he never does. And so we have to wait till Reese Ifans a couple movies from now before we actually get to see the Lizard. But he was all ready to go with that one, and then they had to throw in so many villains. That's one of the smartest things about this movie. Got 1 villain. You know, you can say Jonah Jameson's a villain as well. You could say Spider-Man's even his own worst enemy, but just 1 main villain, and we kept it at that.
I have to say, I was disappointed. I love the Lizard. I'm looking forward to seeing the Lizard.
Yeah, I really wanted him to be able to play the Lizard. I was so excited when they first introduced him in the first movie, and I was like, great, buckle in, I'm all set. We were talking about how this movie came about and the way that the script was developed. Yes, there were certain scenes that they wanted to do. Of course, so much of this is based on, Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 50, Spider-Man No More, where he throws away the suit. We've seen that image of him throwing away the suit. But I was surprised at just how similar this movie is to Superman 2. With the whole, I'm going to give up my powers for the woman that I love kind of thing. It's not as A to B as Superman 2 was. There's a lot more factors for him to give up his powers, and that whole thing with him not taking Uncle Ben's hand, that's just amazing to me. This movie really moves me. There's certain scenes in it where I'm just, especially with Aunt May when she's giving him that speech towards the end, or he's giving her the story of what happened to Uncle Ben. Oh my God, it just tears my heart out, and just the performances are amazing.
The supporting characters always gave color to Spider-Man in the comic, and absolutely in this movie. Aunt May was stellar. Such a good actress. And maybe it's just ephemera for me. When she forgives Peter Parker near the end of the movie, and she goes in for a hug, she's wearing a hairnet. I'm like, yeah, that's my Aunt May right there with the hairnet.
Character accurate, yeah. And that was what I love about this, is it's not slavish to the material, but it's very respectful of the material. And that's what I felt that Raimi did through this whole thing is, yeah, he made a couple changes here and there, but it wasn't like he was just throwing away the baby with the bathwater. He knew what needed to stay, what could go, and just was very judicial with his choices with some of these things. And I love those little exchanges that like Robbie has with Peter Parker. I heard Spider-Man was there. That was so nice. Such a great moment when he's holding the mask in his hand. He's just, what's happened to Peter? What's happened to Spider-Man? Those are fantastic moments. And it's such a shame of all the people that have moved on from this movie that Bill Nunn isn't with us any longer. Rosemary Harris is still with us, but Bill Nunn has been gone for a few years now.
Yeah, the subtlety in the emotional story,
Yes.
the communication with facial expressions, they really relied on their stars for sure. But the supporting crew was right there, just backing them up the whole time. Yeah, like that scene with Robbie, the Aunt May bits where he's confessing to her, it just breaks my heart every time, man. So good, such good storytelling.
For the longest time, and I think when I saw this movie the first time, obviously it was 2004, the internet had been happening, it is a thing, but it wasn't as easy to look up things, so I just was obsessed with Henry Jackson. I'm like, who is this the kid that was helping her move? Because she just keeps saying, to introduce a character by full name, I'm just like, oh, he's got to be somebody. He's not anybody.
Nothing follows up. Nothing.
But I that it's not one of these, oh, that guy is going to marry this person who's going to do this, who's going to do that. And we don't get that type of thing. Of course, we do now in all the Marvel properties. Oh, yeah, that guy, oh, that's Miles Morales' uncle, so we're going to hear about him and yada, yada. No, we don't necessarily have that interconnected world that we do, which is almost refreshing compared to some of the Marvel properties now, which make my head bleed a little bit because it's just, oh, I got to pay attention. Oh, there's that little thing over there. That's one of the Infinity Stones or whatever it is. I feel exhausted after I watch some of those movies.
This movie set up a lot of the fan service that we see now, but it wasn't fan service back then. It was, I don't know, it was probably director service. The directors, I want to make this scene. I want to make this scene work in the storyline. And hey, if it's an Easter egg where they have to drop in a few things from comics history, we're going to do it the right way.
Raimi did that so well when it came to the framing of the shot when he throws away the suit. Or like at the end of the first movie when he's in the cemetery, and I could just see the comic panel in my mind. This one is literally the comic panel. Like you just get to see that so much. For me, this movie is setting up the third movie a little bit as well because of John Jameson. Now, I remember how Spider-Man got the suit, the black suit, the symbiote suit. I read Secret Wars when it was out and everything. But apparently, and I didn't watch this cartoon, but the 90s Spider-Man cartoon that was on, Jameson was in that. And since he's an astronaut, he's the one that brings the symbiote back to Earth. So I kept expecting, third movie, we're going to have the symbiote. It's going to be part of John Jameson. He's going to be angry about Mary Jane leaving him for Spider-Man or for Peter Parker. And it's going to become this whole thing. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen either. So it was sad for me doing my research on this movie and to keep hearing like the audio commentary that Maguire and Raimi did. And they're just like, oh yeah, the studio's been great. No interference. And I'm like, oh man, you don't know what's coming because they're recording it the day that the movie's coming out. It just feels like they are on a train and they don't know that there's no track left.
There's no Spider-Man at the front of it.
And I guess we should say too, famously, the first movie had an amazing teaser trailer, which was the robbery that takes place in New York City. You don't really see Spider-Man very much, but you do get to see his handiwork where he had a web between the World Trade Center buildings and the helicopter that the bank robbers were using is caught up in that web. Boom, Spider-Man 2001. Obviously, they had to kill that trailer after 9/11. They had to take out any references to the World Trade Center in the movie as well. But you get those echoes with this film. You get that moment of the fire in the building, and we have Peter Parker as basically a first responder and coming in and charging in, no care for himself. He just wants to save that little girl. And then you get the scene on the train where it's that whole, you want him, you got to go through me. I love Doc. I was just like, okay. I was hoping that in a darker version of this film, he literally went through them. But I was okay with the way that it went.
Also, interestingly, along that same line, is one of the setup shots for Aunt May's neighborhood. In the first movie, Aunt May's neighborhood was just the row of houses. In the second movie, it was the row of houses, and each one of them had an American flag on it.
I did not notice that. That's great.
Each one of them, wow. All the way down the street.
I love that we get to see the Delta 88 in her driveway and then in the garage later on. Yet another appearance by another Raimi favorite. And we can't talk about this movie without talking about Bruce Campbell's amazing cameo in here. I love that he's the person that goes through all of these movies. He's a fight promoter in the first one. He's this usher in this one. And I think he's a snooty waiter in the third one. Again, it's been a while. But I love that he just seems to be that shared universe. Like now that we have the Tom Holland films, the Home series, we have J. Jonah Jameson seems to show up in all of those. Back to our good friend J.K. Simmons. But for me, it's just like, yeah, bring on Bruce Campbell. I want him to be through every single Spider-Man film.
He's so comfortable with being dislikable.
Well, again, he gets to heap abuse upon Toby, which I think Sam really liked. I think, and there was a moment watching the extras where Tobey Maguire says he directs Bruce Campbell by hitting him with a stick, and then they cut to a shot of Sam literally hitting Bruce on the leg with a stick. Just like, move over there. And I don't know if that was set up. I think it was, but it was fantastic.
And let's get back to the core of it, and it's casting. The casting on the first two movies are just magic. Not only J.K. Simmons as the most J. Jonah Jameson person on the planet, but everybody from Aunt May to Betsy Brandt, the secretary, J. Jonah Jameson's secretary. It's on point.
Elizabeth Banks, too. Unrecognizable as Elizabeth Banks.
Yeah, honestly, I thought it was a totally different actress.
Yeah, when I first saw her, I was like, is that Parker Posey? Right. Yeah, and then when I saw her again, I was like, wait, no, that's Elizabeth Banks that plays that role. There's a great scene, so I don't know if folks have the Blu-ray or not, but there's a version of the film on there called Spider-Man 2.1, and it's just slightly different. There's a couple extra bits in there, like when that scene we were talking about when Doc Ock wakes up and the limbs are going crazy. One of his limbs picks up a guy and throws him up into an electrical light. That lasts a little bit longer. You get to see more of him writhing and going on being electrocuted. So you get that. You get a few extra things, but the one thing that I found interesting was that Hal Sparks scene, completely different. He starts to talk about how he's in marketing, that he'd really like to help Spider-Man be a better marketer of his own self. He's like, have you thought about hammocks? It's got the web thing, and he just keeps going on, and it's just all riffing. I think that was all Hal Sparks just making that up on the fly. It was really good. I kind of like what's here now, but as far as a deleted or extra scene, very funny.
Yeah, I can see where that would be like the first thing that the studio comes in and says, you could save about 2 minutes right there.
Yeah, I think it's 10 minutes in total, but it's just little bits here and there. And unfortunately, it's one of those branching Blu-rays where they move from the main file to the extra file. So there's like a little pause real quick before they move into those extra scenes. And I'm like, we haven't perfected the technology yet.
You need some more tritium to do that.
Yes, exactly. The great what's it, the whole MacGuffin, just that tritium.
Just think if James Cameron would have written this script, we would have gotten unobtainium.
Shoot me now. There were also some script ideas out there where Doc Ock was much younger, and it becomes a love triangle between him and Peter and MJ. Glad they went away from that. I'm glad that they added the Rosie character. She's fantastic. And just to have that parody between Doc Ock and Spider-Man, the whole thing of, oh, I do have a girlfriend, and then when he sees the girlfriend later on, and then immediately threatening to peel the flesh off her bones. And I love that little that one of the claws does. I mean, those claws, the arms that he has, they're so well done, and they have such personality. Every single one of them has a different personality, which I just appreciate, especially the one on his upper right side. I think he called that one Mother, like Molina, not Ock, but it was the one that took off his blindfold, that took off his glasses, that gave him the drink, that lit his cigar. So it's the one that's really taking care of him, which I love.
Interesting. I didn't notice that. But yeah, totally. I was hypnotized by those tentacles. They were an amazing piece of work. And then to find out that not only were they a mix of real effects, puppetry, and the CG all blending seamlessly, but they were also some of the first shots that they were making because they still didn't have a script.
I really liked what they did with the digital doubles. We're seeing that, of course, right now. I just watched the new Roadhouse, and every time somebody gets punched, they're actually punching a digi-double of them, which is weird. It's an odd effect. So that way you don't have to throw the punch past the person. It's taking away that whole stage fighting thing, and it's allowing actors to, quote-unquote, hit one another, but it's all hitting the digital double kind of thing. Like here you've got that digital double of Dr. Octopus, especially when he grabs MJ and starts to carry her across, or grabs Aunt May and starts to carry her up a building. A little bit of symmetry there. And he looks fakish, but it was done so well in 2004 that I'm like, okay, yeah, this works. And seeing it here on the big screen, it worked even better than seeing it on a Blu-ray or something where it's just too much detail. You're giving me too much information here.
Yeah, exactly. It was a joy seeing this in 35 millimeter, just beautiful print. And seeing how well it was shot for that medium and projected for that medium for us and our old eyeballs. And yeah, specifically like those scenes where Doc Ock is bringing Mary Jane up the building and throwing her over the parapet of the building. I don't know. I grew up with Jason and the Argonauts, man. I'm used to stop motion animation being all clunky, and that was smooth as hell. So good.
Those fight scenes, it's all about the momentum and the reaction. I love when Peter's fighting him on that clock tower, and the way he's stretching the web and everything. Even when he's saving Aunt May and he's using the stretch of the web to shoot himself out of that garment building at him, looks so good. And I just love that it's all that. Who's moving where, what's the reaction, and my God, the train sequence. Oh my goodness, that is just a masterpiece of action. And like now we see those kind of things all the time. It reminded me of Age of Ultron, where they're trying to get the casket with Vision, and they're chasing down the highway and doing all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is a nice action scene, but it doesn't have the weight, doesn't have the danger, I think, of this, especially because it's so many innocent bystanders that are in the way and are just about to get killed every moment of that whole thing.
Yeah, danger is all around for everybody on that block, that path around that train. Just anything could happen. And yeah, we're just watching it play out. Beautiful.
And I love that both of our characters defy gravity. Spider-Man's got the sticky feet and hands and everything, so that when he's there on the front of the train, completely parallel to it, or perpendicular, I should say, he's parallel to the tracks. Just amazing stuff. And I forget that he can do those things, but I'm sold when I see that. I'm just like, oh yeah, that's his power. He can do that. So to see them fighting on the side of the train, and then you're like, oh shit, they're on the side of the train. They're not on the top anymore. It's great because they both have that ability to do that. Doc's got all those arms keeping him supported. To see him move around the city and everything, I think looks really good as well. And just the sound mix of that, when you hear those clumps of his feet coming, or that moment with MJ and Peter where they're in the cafe, and you hear the noise, but then you get those little push-ins. Just those little snap zooms that we have of the characters, and just to make that menace come more towards them.
I wanted to see ripples in that coffee cup.
Oh, yeah. But yet, after he gets the tritium,
I will say, just touching back on that train scene, I was amazed to hear that they had to base the visuals on the Chicago raised train tracks because by that time, 2004, New York had already uninstalled and decommissioned all of them. So they were basing so much of that on the system from a completely different city.
I just did an episode at the projection booth about the Hudsucker proxy, just recorded it 2 days ago. And that is a mix of New York and Chicago as far as the skyline and that amazing model work and all that. And it was neat to watch that because Raimi obviously had at least did second unit directing. If you're going to get a second unit director who's better than Sam Raimi, and he also helped write the script for that. So I was like hearing little echoes of things in this movie, but that idea of mixing Chicago architecture and Chicago cityscape with New York, I was like, yeah, he just did that a few years, 10 years prior at this point when he did the Hudsucker proxy.
Yeah, I think one of the visual effects people was saying how they wanted to get a specific shot of the New York City skyline, but it wasn't New York City-y enough. So they had to put in extra New York.
Just bump up the New York, take the New York, and just turn it to the right.
But you got to put extra buildings in.
Oh, yeah.
And you got to enhance things.
The way that they did that Spidey cam, where it just is moving through the city, and to find out that wasn't all 100% digital, there are a lot of digital effects in some of those sequences. Trust me, like when he's going through the semi-trailer and he goes through between the front of it and the back of it, and he just right through. That, of course, is digital effect, but so many of those shots of just flying through the city, that's all practical. They had these giant cameras that they would have on wires and move around to get that footage that they could put him in later. Like the very end sequence with the two helicopters, that's just, it's incredible to know that's like real cityscape. I'm sure I know that they shot it at, honestly, they shot it at 6 frames a second. So it just moves so fast, but they're like, yeah, that's how Spider-Man would move.
On that same note, on visual effects, endlessly fascinating to me. On the scene where they're fighting on the side of the building, and he just keeps tossing Aunt May down. No, she's done this time.
Right.
They went back and forth up and down that building so many times that they played fast and loose with how many stories were on the building. Like sometimes it was like a 50-story building, other times more like 150.
They were definitely playing with that because she follows a long time. And the one thing that I think folks were like either laughing or screaming over was when Molina looks up at him and goes, Butterfingers. Just those little like over the glasses moments that he does for me are great. And I like that he keeps wearing sunglasses at night because he's that cool. But he wears the sunglasses. He's got the welder's type of goggles. That is so true to the character. But then Raimi explains why he's doing this other than the sunglasses at night. But he just looks so cool with those glasses on.
The design of the harness for the tritium igniter from the first design where it's all fancy and polished and ready to be presented to high society and investors, to the second version where it's just like, hey, I had to buy some steel girders and I got some tubes. We're going to put this together. And it was bigger and it was even more effective.
It totally was, yeah. I love the stories of how they even measured out Doc Ock's arms, that they had all of this fake tubing, speaking about DIY, had all this like fake tubing that they had, and they kept chopping it off until they got to the point where they're just, that's the look. And they just had, probably not even Molina, it was probably some poor PA or something where they're just like, all right, now pose, now do this, now do that. All right, take it down another few inches until they got it to that perfect length. And then that they had to develop the feet part, the lower legs, to be different than the upper legs so that they've got those big feet so that he can walk on those. And that they kept trying in the visual effects. They're like, there's no way we can make it look like those big feet come out of that little tube, but they did it. it looks so good. When they first reveal it, I was paying special attention to that tonight, and I'm just like, that works. It just comes down a little bit more and then opens up. And I love how Raimi had names for all of those different configurations. Like he would call the ones when they would open up, he'd call those the death flowers. And then he was the one that came up with the knife that comes out when Doc Ock's about to murder Peter during that fight with Aunt May. And she's just, oh, how could you? Or whatever. He was just like, oh, he needs a death saber. So I guess death is very good for Sam's vocabulary.
Well, he's the man.
Yes, he is.
He's created a lot of death in his career.
Oh, yeah, quite a bit. I want to talk a little bit more about Dr. Octopus. I think you're probably one of the few people that I can talk to about the Superior Spider-Man, because that is probably my favorite Dr. Octopus incarnation, even though it's not Dr. Octopus. Is anybody in the audience familiar with the Superior Spider-Man? All right, great.
All right.
Superior Spider-Man, for those who don't know, is one of the great storylines for me, which is, and I don't remember how it starts. Peter goes into a coma of some sort or whatever, but Doc Ock gets inside of Peter's brain and basically pushes him out of the way. And he becomes Spider-Man. But he says, I'm not just going to be Spider-Man. I'm going to be the best Spider-Man that there ever has been, ever, period, end of story. And I love how he keeps trying to do good things, but they always turn out to be really fascistic and bad. Like he's like, I want to monitor crime everywhere in the city. So I'm going to release all these little spider drones, and they're going to go all over the city, and they're going to basically spy on everyone across the town. So and I'm reading this, I can't remember what year that came out, but it definitely felt like way before The Dark Knight Rises, where he's got all the TV cameras, and Morgan Freeman is there going, hey, you're crossing the line. But I just love the way that whole storyline played out. I think that's one of my favorite Ock storylines. Do you have a favorite? Either Dr. Octopus or Spider-Man's storyline?
Honestly, I'm there with you. Superior Spider-Man, I felt like an outcast in my own store.
Really?
People were just like, how can you possibly be enjoying this? This is not Peter Parker. I'm like, no, it's not Peter Parker. It's some guy with a huge ego in Peter Parker's body. And yeah, and he winds up being just as much of a loser as Peter Parker.
Yeah, yes, he does. And it's nice because Dr. Octopus is not that great of a guy, obviously, and he's the loser himself. Obviously gets his ass handed to him every time he goes up against Spider-Man, but it's the one time he really gets the upper hand, and then he proves what a fuck-up he is again.
I've got a copy of the Superior Superior Spider-Man Omnibus with me, because I just feel like I'm going to sell this book to somebody, and they're going to enjoy this. They're going to discover how cool it is to be a jerk and accidentally fix things.
Yes. Now, wasn't there a run to Superior Octopus or something as well?
They've done a couple different versions of it, and they're actually right now revisiting it with the original writer Dan Slott.
Okay.
He's telling a story, a little side story from back in that day, but that is a brand new story.
Okay, cool.
They continue to develop the idea anyways.
I'll have to make sure to stop by Green Brain and pick up a copy, or copies, I should say, because I know it's going to be a whole series of those. I usually wait for the graphic novels just so I can have them all collected, but I'm sure that you hate to hear those words.
Honestly, it's all comics to me, man. If you're reading comics, we're friends. We're simpatico.
So you've never seen Spider-Man 3?
I never have, no.
Wow. Okay. Now that's another one where there's multiple versions of it as well. So there's the version that we'll see next week here, and then there's another version which I think they saddled Bob Murawski with it being called the editor's cut rather than the producer's cut, director's cut. And I want to just say that it was a earlier cut of the film, so it's a little less massaged by the studio, let's say. But I haven't had the courage to bring myself to watch it yet, because that third movie. I'm curious to get your response from that third movie.
I consider that a dare.
Yeah. It's going to test your patience, for sure. And the thing is that it revisits a lot of the things from this movie already in the third movie. I'm like, well, it's way too soon for this kind of stuff. So, again, Peter Parker cut loose. There's one whole scene where he's dancing and gets really embarrassing. By the way, why didn't Peter just go in during the intermission of The Importance of Being Earnest? Or had the intermission already passed?
I think Bruce was just blocking him.
Really? Just the whole time?
Bruce was just hanging out. Running interference for the show.
What a smart thing to do, too, to use that as your play inside of the play, and to hear her talking about, oh, you lead two lives. Are you wicked? Are you nice? Just the way that she's talking about that. It was such a clever play to have within the play. And I'm trying to remember what it was, because that's also in that earlier draft of the script. It's not Importance of Being Earnest, though. It's something else. But I was like trying to see how that played out, but I think it was completely like fake title, fake author type of thing. So smarter going with Oscar Wilde.
Absolutely. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt like they took the right chance there versus just inventing something from whole cloth as a metaphor. It wouldn't have that same power.
I love those Alex Ross paintings at the beginning. I love how they move into Mary Jane on that billboard, because it still looks like it's a painting, but then it's slowly revealed to be that billboard, the way that the words come up. And the image of her just taunts Peter. I didn't notice until this time watching it that when he almost runs into the bus, it's an ad for that perfume on the side of the bus. I don't remember seeing her picture, but I remember seeing the words. And I was like, oh, that's good. I wouldn't have been surprised had they almost had him crash right into her face on there, because that would have, I think, just been.
Yeah, that was Alex Ross that did the paintings for the intro sequence, and I have to say that is a very good use of an intro sequence and a sequel. It's all that storytelling that is now just out of the way. Yeah, you get caught up, motivations, and you see the aftermath of what happened. Oh yeah, and now go.
I think the only other movie that I can think of that used an opening as effectively. Actually, I think this one's better, but the opening to the Edward Norton Incredible Hulk movie, they just skip past all that backstory, which was great, and they just do it in the opening credits, because I don't need to see Hulk's origin story yet again, because we get that so often. And I was glad when it comes to the Tom Holland stuff, they just skip right over the origin story. They just, he already did this, and we're off to the races type of thing. At least that's my memory, and feel free to correct me, but I remember them being introducing him as part of, that one's Civil War, introducing him as a part of Civil War, just getting right into the story, having the smart alecky kid, and just off we go, and then giving him his own film franchise. I was like, okay, this works out very well for me, because we didn't have to go through that whole origin again. And but we do have to go through hot Aunt May. It's funny how Aunt May in this one, and then we get Sally Field, so we shave off more time, and then we get Marissa Tomei, and yeah, okay, how much hotter can we make Aunt May? I really don't need to go down this path.
Yeah, I don't want to think. I don't want to think.
Did you ever read the What If Uncle Ben had lived?
Oh, a long time ago.
Yeah. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember, I think Aunt May ends up having to die in that one. And then Uncle Ben basically becomes Spider-Man's like manager and knows everything about him, and is just like, oh, no, you got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. So those stories I always find interesting to see how the writers come up with, oh, no, it would have played out similar, just a little different.
Is it as exciting and believable as one of the What If stories where Aunt May became the Herald of Galactus?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They will do anything.
Silver Surfer Aunt May?
She was gold.
I love those What If comics because, yeah, they get really out there sometimes.
The opening sequence reminded me in a way of the opening sequence in the All-Star Superman comic book.
Oh, okay.
Anybody read All-Star Superman? Grant Morrison, there it is. He did Superman's origin in one page.
Oh, wow.
4 panels, 8 words.
Mm-hmm.
Superman's origin. Here we are, page 2.
Nice. That's great. I always loved Red Sun, because Red Sun was a What If, S-O-N.
Yeah.
Just that whole, he arrived a couple hours later, or even an hour later, the Earth had turned, and so he lands in Soviet Russia and becomes the hero of the Soviet people. got a little out there when they had like Soviet versions of Batman and a Soviet version of Wonder Woman and everything. I was like, okay, you're pushing at Mark Millar. Otherwise, I was with you with that because I just find that whole twist of fate, like just a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. You don't end up with the Kents. You end up with Stalin.
Going deep nerd into comics, they did that what if setup with the new Ultimate Universe. They just relaunched the Ultimate Universe at Marvel Comics. A redo to update things in the 2000s, right approximately at the time that they started launching the Spider-Man movies, they launched Ultimate Spider-Man. And now a couple decades, a generation later, they're revisiting it. But there's a character, a villain, who, with his unlimited power and resources, went in and essentially changed history in the Ultimate Universe and basically started eliminating superheroes by keeping them from becoming the superhero. So Peter Parker never became Spider-Man. He and Mary Jane got married and had a kid, and he had to go to work. And that's when the Ultimate Universe 2024 starts over.
Interesting. Yeah, I always find that it feels like with some of those that nature will find a way, that line from Jurassic Park, where it's like, even if you are prevented, does his son become a superhero? Or does Peter Parker somehow become a superhero despite that villain?
There's people that understand and know that this villain has done this. So they're like, we're going to have to do what we can to make these superheroes. And they proceed to get the Ultimate Universe rebooted in whole cloth. They're like, oh, we don't have any superheroes. We got to make some. Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man in his middle age.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So now he's got to balance bills, taking care of his Aunt May, with the fact that he's married with a child, and he also struggles to put food on the table.
And I don't know if it must have been during that Ultimate Spider-Man earlier run, which I didn't read all of it, but I did find that story arc that they talk about being self-referential, where it was the shooting of Spider-Man 2 inside of the Spider-Man universe, and Spider-Man can't catch a break. We all know that. Spider-Man can't cash in on the rights to his own story, so he's still poor, even though they're making a movie of his life. And I think he ends up having to save the day and everything, but it's great to see. I can't remember the producer, Ari Arad, I think it is.
Yeah.
And then also Sam Raimi in comic book form. I want to say there's even like a little Bruce cameo in there. So yeah, it's just amazing that they ended up doing that so pointedly, redoing the behind the scenes of Spider-Man 2 in the Ultimate Spider-Man. Yeah, all right. But it worked. I thought it was a great little run.
It's the other side of the mirror, man.
Talking about the arms of Doc Ock, yes, there's puppetry, yes, there's CG effects, but to think of the noise of those servos and the clunking, I already mentioned the clunking of the feet and everything, but just the little chink-chink of the hands and everything, the death flowers, that all comes together as one big package, and the sound effects in this movie are fantastic. They just tell such a story. Even when you think about when the first time we see Peter Parker in his apartment, you hear the train going. You hear bottles rattling. We never see the train outside of Peter's apartment, but he lives in such a shitty place that him being right next to a railroad track makes total sense. Total Elwood Blues type apartment. And I really like that, and it also is a little bit of foreshadowing, too, for the train sequence later on. And it just, all of this stuff adds up to one beautiful package.
So I think we should definitely say that New York City is one of the most important supporting characters in that movie.
Well, that's what I loved about Spider-Man 2, taking us all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, that Spider-Man and these Marvel heroes live in the real world. They don't live in Metropolis. They don't live in Gotham. That's fine for the DC universe, but I love that. These are real places, that we have your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, that we've got our protector in Hell's Kitchen. We've got our person uptown. We've got our person in Queens. That every area of New York has their own different superhero or supervillain.
Yeah, Hell's Kitchen. They got a couple.
The one I'm thinking of is Daredevil. I don't know who else is there.
Elektra pops in every now and then. You got Power Man, Iron Fist walking through.
Is that where Jessica Jones is at as well?
Jessica Jones keeps her office in Hell's Kitchen.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, Dan, tell me what's going on at Green Brain Comics these days.
It's a pretty exciting time for us. We just did some renovations. We got a nice new facade on the building. We're working on giving it a new paint job and freshening it up, all in time for Free Comic Book Day, which is coming up on Saturday, May 4th. That's our big annual event. It's a big industry event. Comic stores throughout the world have access to comics that are produced just for Free Comic Book Day. And we order thousands, and we're giving away 3 comics to anybody that comes by. Just for coming by, you get 3 free comics that are made specifically for Free Comic Book Day. This is all new material. We've got a brand new Spider-Man comic. It's weaving its way into the new storylines for this year. And it's also Star Wars Day, Saturday, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. And we'll also have a free Star Wars comic that day. Ooh, we've got so much happening that day. We've got a bunch of local creators under a big tent behind the building. Check them out and see some of the great offerings that local Detroit creators have to display that day. We've got community groups going to be there, the Friends of the Animal Metro Detroit, the Hemophilia Society of Michigan, that's a first-time guest for us, and also for the first time, the Dearborn firefighters are going to be at the store. The fire chief will be our officiant for the evening to declare it Free Comic Book Day in Dearborn, and we will also be supporting the Dearborn firefighters boot drive that will go to help offset costs for firefighters fighting leukemia. Along with that, there's extra ways to get extra free comics. You can wear a costume. We've got a food donation for Gleaner's Food Bank, used book donation for Friends of the Library Dearborn. And if you make a purchase inside the store, we'll give you an even extra free comic.
This is such a package deal that you have going here. For folks that are listening to this later on that aren't in the Michigan area, where's the best place for them to go to check out Green Brain?
Green Brain Comics, we do have a website, greenbraincomics.com. Also have a shopping cart. You can shop our entire store through our website. All of our social media is at Green Brain Comics.
Not Green Goblin, but Green Brain.
Not Green Goblin. That was good, though.
That's a good Freudian slip there. So I want to thank the Motor City Cinema Society for inviting us out, the Redford Theatre for putting us on. I want to thank you folks, the diehards that have stuck around this entire time. I think there's, what do we have, 5, 6, 7 people here? Wow.
5, 6, 700.
Whoa. Yes, of course. Thank you, Dan, so much for coming out and being part of this. Thank you, folks, for coming out here as well. Thank you also to John Monahan, my former landlord, who knows that I'm very into movies and is always looking for opportunities to partner up, which is great. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth on the projection booth, definitely come on over to weirdingwaymedia.com. All the shows that I work on are over there. Talk about Columbo, talk about Barney Miller. I seem to be stuck in the 70s for some reason. But we also talk about Tales from the Dark Side, getting into the 80s, starting to edge up into the 80s. But yeah, everything is available at weirdingwaymedia.com. And I want to thank, if anybody here is a Patreon supporter, visit our page over at patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
Pizza time.